We learned a lot from the Chargers' first preseason game, and today we're talking about the big winners like Josh Kelley and Chris Rumph and how the Chargers' 2022 draft class fared in their first taste of live action.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers together for over 6 seasons, but we're heading into our 5th season as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen after the Chargers' first preseason game, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and also follow the show for free on all platforms wherever you get your podcast from. But David, so much to get to after that first preseason game. I think we saw some separation in some position battles, and we definitely saw some young guys step up, and I think saw some young guys develop over the last season under Brandon Staley and his coaching staff's tutelage, like Chris Rumph and Josh Kelley being two big examples of that. Michael Bandy showed out, and he was probably the best offensive player. And you have someone like Morgan Fox, who really showed the best interior pressure of the night, which is a big case for him going forward in that defensive line rotation, but also the rookies, David, like Zion Johnson, who played well, Isaiah Spiller playing well, and also some guys who had some moments to learn from, and probably not overreacting to guys like Dean Leonard and JT Woods after some really rough performances. But today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. But David, when you saw this game, what was the one player that really stood out to you the most? This is obviously a showcase for some of these guys to show that he deserved either bigger roles, right, or deserve to be on this team. Where would you go?
Yeah, I think my mind just immediately goes to Josh Kelley. Josh Kelley was a guy that when we went to training camp, we noticed that this guy looks bigger. This guy looks like he's in fantastic shape, and he was having a great training camp. He was really going out there and making a lot of plays, and I wanted to see how that was going to translate to on-field action, and he looks the part on the field as well. He was really making plays. He was decisive. He looked physical. He had some acceleration and burst. Josh Kelley, to me, looked like a different man.
Yeah, he did. And I said that, I remember after the first day, I was just like, he just looks like a different, physical body composition. He just looks,
no doubt,
in better shape. And it showed. He looked more explosive. He made a couple people miss. He was the Chargers' best running back in the first preseason game. He averaged over 5 yards a carry. He looked really good as a receiver, looked way better in the open field. And I just think you're seeing him turn a corner and getting some of that confidence back that he obviously lost after that first, couple of games his rookie year, where he hadn't been the same since. David, it's hard to have a much worse preseason than Josh Kelley had. We were talking about it before the show. Last preseason in 2021, he had 18 carries for 30 yards. That's a 1.6 yard per carry average.
That's
but
horrible.
Also, Larry Roundtree averaged like almost 9 yards per carry in the first preseason game last year. So obviously things can change, but for Josh Kelley, it was just great to see him really stepping up and trying to take that RB2 spot. And in this game, he did create some separation there. He looked like the best back, and he looked like he was ready to have a larger role, something we haven't thought at all since Brandon Staley took over. So that's great to see. But how do you not talk about Chris Rumph early on in the show too, right, David? Because he's a guy who's he's not battling for a roster spot. His roster spot is basically secured, but he is going to play some meaningful snaps on this defense. And he looked like he was ready. I think when you have veterans like this returning and a second-year player like Chris Rumph, who obviously put on some good weight and made some major strides in the offseason, to have confidence that he's going to be a guy that you're going to feel good with if either Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack step off the field. And at least in this game, he was probably one of the most impressive defenders they had out there, had a tackle for loss and a sack very early on in this game. And I just came away super impressed with him.
Chris Rumph, as Joey Bosa put it so eloquently, went from a string bean to an asparagus, and that added weight and that strength definitely showcased itself on the field on Saturday night against the Rams. He was everywhere, and I put that on Twitter because it felt like Chris Rumph was in on every single major play, like positive defensive play that the Chargers made. He was able to shun off a tight end and nail a guy in the backfield for a 2-yard loss. he was able to bull rush a left tackle into the quarterback and swallow that quarterback up for a sack. Chris Rumph looked like a dude that you feel like is instilling confidence in his coaches that he's going to be able to go out there and provide adequate play this year. And that's what they were looking for. They were looking for him to develop from his rookie year to his second year. And he definitely looks like he has put himself in position to have a very good sophomore season.
Yeah, and especially with the linebacking unit in disarray right now and not knowing how much Kyle Van Noy is going to bring to the edge group, I think that's a huge sign for the Chargers. And I mean, he got off the field early, and I think that was indicative of how the Chargers felt of his performance. But I'm glad he brought up his sack because it was directly caused by Morgan Fox, who also made a statement in this first game in live action. Hadn't heard a ton about him in training camp. He comes into this game and gets 3 pressures, gets the pressure that leads to Chris Rumph's sack. I mean, he bull rushes the guard, gets right in and has a hand basically on the quarterback's leg by the time Chris Rumph got there.
Walked the guard back, just absolutely dominated him.
And on Chris Rumph's worst play of the night, when he whiffed on a sack that him and Emeka Egbuka should have had, it was originally the pressure by Morgan Fox that made him, start to bounce around and made him a wide open target for multiple Chargers defenders. But the tackling is not going to make it onto the list of big winners today. But Morgan Fox definitely doing something and maybe creating some separation and being that defensive tackle that comes in, especially on passing down situations.
Morgan Fox was a guy that actually made his presence known. He was a guy that was connecting his pass rush moves, and he was making plays. He was getting pressure on the quarterback. That's what he was brought in here to do. He is an inside pass rush specialist. That's exactly what Morgan Fox is, and they need it, and he showcased why they brought him in. They rewarded some of that faith, at least early on here in the preseason. Morgan Fox looking good.
Yeah, and I mean, they really, really need that interior pass rush from somebody. And I think Sebastian Joseph Day is going to bring some of it. But after that, a lot of these guys who were brought in, like Austin Johnson, right, to be a run-stopping specialist, and Braden Fehoko, who I think had a really, really good game and deserves to be mentioned in this conversation as well. He's not known for his pass rushing ability. He's really a run defender first and foremost. Morgan Fox should have a role, especially if you have obvious passing down situations. It's between him and Tillery right now. It wasn't Tillery who came away with the edge after the first preseason game because he played as well. Nothing from him. But there is one more guy we have to mention, David, and it is Michael Bandy, because that dude is trying to make himself uncuttable. He is trying to go for a roster spot for basically wide receiver 6, which didn't exist when the Chargers opened things up with their initial 53-man roster last year. But he's doing everything he can to make them keep an extra on this year.
Well, hey, I mean, you look at Michael Bandy, especially on that touchdown, you look at that whip route and you're like, man, that looks an awful lot like Hunter Renfrow there. I mean, he has that quickness. He has that precise route running. I'm not trying to compare these two. Obviously, Hunter Renfrow had a phenomenal year for the Raiders last year, but you can just see that. You can see that application in the offense, and he was all over the place. He showcased strong hands, some good speed, and he was all over the place the entire night. He had 7 catches for over 70 yards receiving, and that touchdown I talked about where he basically jogged into the end zone because he beat the defender so badly.
Yeah, and I mean, I had put out a tweet at one point just like, I think he smoked every single Rams DB in this game because it didn't seem like it mattered where he lined up. He was making plays all over the field, and when someone like Chase Daniel was saying, hey, that's a quarterback's best friend right there, that's obviously high praise and means you're doing something right. And for someone like Michael Bandy, for such a long shot like that, these are the type of performances you have to have. You have to be Austin Eckler, right? You have to make them not be able to cut you because they know somebody else.
You got to be the best player on the field. And
for sure.
On that night, I mean, that seemed like it was Michael Bandy.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some other players, David, who deserve recognition here, and we'll get into them more when we get more into these position battles. But Joe Reed had a really good game in this one. It was nice to see him pop back
up. Made me happy.
That was really nice to see. Braden Fehoko, Easton Stick, I mean, I thought he looked really improved as well.
He did.
Troy Reeder, I was very pleasantly surprised by. That dude was filling holes and laying the lumber.
A absolutely massive hit on pretty much anybody he went up against.
Yeah.
It seemed like that guy hit like a Mack truck.
And it just seemed like he knew exactly where he's supposed to be in this Brandon Staley's defense. And I was pretty surprised at how mature some of these Chargers rookies looked in their first game. And there was also a lot of rookie growing pains as well. But you don't have to count Zion Johnson there, who I thought looked as advertised in his first week. We're going to get into how the rookies fared in the Chargers 2022 draft class, with Zion Johnson having a really positive game, Isaiah Spiller having a really positive game, and much more before getting into some guys we're going to need a bounce back in preseason week number 2. But I do need to tell you guys about something very important to me, though, and that is BetterHelp, because BetterHelp is something that I think, especially as dudes and football dudes, I think a lot of people can let therapy and things like that and their mental health really get going sometimes and just not really take it seriously. And it's something, especially during COVID, that I started taking a lot more seriously. And I love BetterHelp because it is a remote way to get the therapy that you need without having to go through the trouble of having to drive somewhere. You can get it at your house whenever you want. And the best thing to me is how easy it was to set up. You can ask you what you're dealing with, and that's so important, to be honest and just be able to open up to someone, and also finding the right match for you. It's so easy to find someone new. If you want to try a new therapist, if you want to, kind of test things out to see which therapy is best for you, that's where BetterHelp comes in and is really, really good. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. You're not stuck to the normal office hours you are with going into an actual therapist's office, and it's more affordable than the traditional online therapy or offline therapy. And the financial aid is available if you need it. You can get some through BetterHelp. BetterHelp is a great way to invest yourself. Visit their website and read the testimonials that are posted all over the place. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp that they have additional recruits that they've had to bring in to help everybody out. They have a special offer right now for our listeners. If you guys go to BetterHelp, you can get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. All right, David, we talked about the biggest winners, and there was a lot from this game. Even in a game that you lose, right? You just learn so much about these young guys in these games, and nobody more than these rookies, because as good as a camp as you can have, all the things you can do leading up to that first preseason game, when the live bullets are coming at you, it's a completely different thing, and it becomes
That's
much
right.
more serious. You are thrown into the fire, and the spotlight is on you, especially if you're the Chargers' first round pick, like Zion Johnson, right? Because he had a lot of expectations. If you take a position like that early in the first round, in the middle of the first round, I mean, you need that player to be a very good player. And for Zion Johnson, he's going to be asked to come in and start at right guard right away for the Chargers. There's no competition there. It's Zion Johnson and everybody else. So it was really nice, David, to see him come out and be as advertised. I really liked Zion Johnson's game in the first preseason game of the season. Didn't play a ton, but I was really impressed with what he did when he was out there.
Yeah, save for one play where he did get a little bit beat by an inside counter
He got
move.
very beat, but yeah.
He was, yeah, I'm trying to be generous here. I'm trying to sugarcoat it a little bit. He did get beat kind of badly on that play. But outside of that, he looked like he was the guy we thought he was. He looked like a guy who was very, very stout in pass protection, a guy who was looking for help, had his head on a swivel, a guy who was a road grader in the running game. You just get so excited because you're like, man, that's the guy I saw on tape in college. That's the guy that the Chargers brought in. You feel really good about how he is going to get plugged in next to Corey Linsley and Matt Filer, and you feel really good about what he is going to do here in his rookie season.
Yeah, and I mean, it seemed like the communication was there. It seemed like all that stuff was right where it should be, especially early on for a young player like Zion Johnson. It didn't seem like he was ever out of position.
No,
He did get beat one-on-one one time, right? And I mean, that's something that's going to happen. It's a valuable learning experience.
absolutely.
The ball got away before it was even enough to be considered a pressure by Pro Football Focus. But let's not get started on Pro Football Focus, because if you're going off the grade for them on Zion Johnson's first game, you would think he's probably the worst rookie in the NFL. If you ever look, I mean, and it's always hard with these incredibly small sample sizes, but there's just no way to look at that game and give Zion Johnson like a 20 grade for that game. Like, the dude didn't give up a pressure. They didn't credit him with any pressures allowed. He pancaked two dudes. He was a finisher in this game. He was super physical.
Yeah, I don't pay attention to the PFF grades right here in preseason.
No, you
You got
can't.
to trust your eyes. You got to pay attention to what you see. And what I saw is Zion Johnson belongs.
Yeah, no. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, that's the thing with some of these guys, right? Is you want them to look like they belong, right? And then for certain guys like a Jerry Tillery at this point, right? Or even Morgan Fox, you want them to go dominate guys that they
Absolutely.
shouldn't be on the field with them, kind of a thing. With Zion Johnson, you saw some dominant reps. You saw some very physical reps. You saw him be a finisher and help and knock a guy off of his feet.
Yep.
You love all of that stuff. And like, people get beat all the time on the play that he did get beat. The ball was already out well before anyone could have made a play on it in the backfield. So it's not a huge thing at all. But speaking of a physical presence, that's what I think of when I think of Jamari Sawyer, because that dude was road grading people for sure. Another situation, David, with Jamari Sawyer, where they've lacked the depth for so long on the offensive line. I'm not going to just say that it's fixed off of one preseason performance, but it's hard to feel much better about these two dudes, him and Zion Johnson, and the interior future for the Chargers after that performance, because Zion Johnson is great. Jamari Sawyer is just huge. I mean, the dude is absolutely massive, and like he could just lean on you and you'll fall over. Like he's just that big and that strong, and like that's what you want to see. Yes, he did make some mistakes, but you saw a physically dominant player for some of those reps where it's like the player in front of him just didn't stand a chance, and that's going against a 6th-round rookie.
Yeah, I mean, Jamari Sawyer here, when I was watching him in this game, I'm like, okay, like this guy looks like if you needed him to play meaningful snaps for you, I feel comfortable putting him out there. And there's not really a lot of times in the
Living
past.
through the growing pains, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Obviously. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying he's perfect here, but I feel a lot more comfortable than I would have with several of the depth pieces that the Chargers have had in the past.
And
Throwing
potentially
him
some
out
of the
there.
starters there.
Yes, and Senio Clemente just pops in your mind here, like, oh my gosh.
I mean, man, it was Dan Feeney, it was Forrest Lamp. I mean, there's
A
been a
laundry
turnstile
list of
there a long
guys
time.
that probably shouldn't have been starting, and then you have a guy that's going to be coming in as a backup, at least in the beginning of his career, and you see a lot of traits that make you get excited for what he is going to bring to the offensive line, hopefully for many years to come.
Well, how many games did the backup right guard play last season, right? That could
Yeah,
be such a meaningful
12.
position, and like he has a chance to really solidify himself as that third guard, right? That next guy off of the bench. And I mean, it was a really good showing towards that. Brendan Heim is another guy who played okay. I mean,
solid.
for sure, nothing crazy there. But I did think the guys who stood out the most were Jamari Sawyer and Zion Johnson. I think those dudes had a really, really good week 1 in the preseason. But Isaiah Spiller looked great too, David, and it kind of lost in maybe this Josh Kelley situation is just how good the rookie did. And I think even though you look and see 10 carries, 34 yards, it's not super impressive. 3.4 yards per carry is not great. But it's what he did in those that I think really showed me some promise. I think the other thing to keep in mind here too is he was working with the worst of those offensive line units, right? He didn't get to run behind Zion Johnson. He did a little bit maybe with Jamari Sawyer, who played a little later than Johnson did, but like it was the much worse of the lines that Josh Kelley was running behind earlier in the game. I saw vision, patience, the cuts were there, David. The footwork in traffic I thought was really good. I was impressed with his first game, even though the stat line might not look like anything to, brag about.
Yeah, I didn't pay attention to the stat line, and I don't pay attention to it too much. I want to see the movements. I want to see the hands. I want to see the contact balance. I want to see the ability to break tackles. It was all there. I mean, he made a really nice catch where he had to make an adjustment, kind of.
That was a
while the
really,
ball was in
really
the
tough
air.
catch.
Like that's a catch that some receivers
Really
don't make.
catch. Yeah.
So to see a 21-year-old rookie come in here and make it look easy, make it look like he's done it every single day leading up to this game, you see the work that's been put in. You really can you understand and you can really see why the Chargers are really excited about Isaiah Spiller, especially in between the tackles. This is a guy that just doesn't go down on first contact. He's constantly keeping his legs churning, and I felt like it was after obviously a bad first run. After that, it looked like several of those runs were very productive, and you can see why the Chargers were very excited about getting him here in the 4th round.
Yeah, I mean, he got blown up a couple times, which hurt the average where there was just nothing there. But I
Sure.
thought he made the most out of his opportunities, and that's all you can ask for. There was a couple, seemed like he was pretty close to breaking them, right? And maybe that's the next step is turning that 6-yard gain into a 15-yard gain.
Yes.
Right. And maybe that takes a second, but like didn't seem like the moment was too big for him, even as the youngest player in the entire draft class. And that's just so impressive. Also picked up a blitz, which I put on Twitter, that's like catnip for coaching staff. You want to get trust from your coaching staff, you pass protect, especially when it's Justin Herbert that you're protecting for. But Isaiah Spiller, to me, I thought he passed the test in week 1. And it's something where he may have also created some separation between himself and Larry Roundtree, who had just had a pedestrian 3 carries for 8 yards. It seemed like they wanted to get a good look at Spiller. I think they'll continue to, especially knowing, maybe they have someone in Joshua Kelley, that they can feel better about as well. Maybe it is, a 3 running back deep group that they have, and obviously led by Austin Eckler. But Isaiah Spiller, that catch, man, I mean, to catch a ball behind you, spin around, and still have the momentum to gain 10 yards off of that play is super impressive. I think he could have the Chargers' best hands potentially, even over Austin Eckler at this trajectory at some point. I mean, Austin Eckler obviously catches a ton of passes, has had a few bounce off him as well, but he just has really, really soft hands that
he does.
He has receiver-like hands, and that took Austin Eckler a little while too, even though he's been great right away. But I was impressed by these guys. And there were a couple of rookies I wasn't as impressed with, David. I mean, I was really feeling for Dean Leonard. That was a really tough start. And JT Woods, a little bit up and down. I thought there were some things that were worth some promise and showing some promise. And there was a play where he literally tackled a defender, or his own defender, off of a wide receiver for a 60-yard touchdown. So we'll talk about not overreacting to some bad games by some of these rookies. But David, if I were to have to bet on it, I think the running back situation right now is probably Eckler, Josh Kelley, Isaiah Spiller in that order, and that is pretty good. But if I am placing a bet, I do it with betonline.net, the official betting sponsor of the Locked On Chargers podcast. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. And for me, football season is back, so I know what I'm going to be betting on over these next, 4 months, because football is the best time to get in on the action. There's so many good NFL futures that are still going on before the regular season starts. There's live in-game betting, so you can change your fate, because sometimes everyone gets into that spot, and I love to be able to change it in real time. So head to BetOnline today, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action happening today at BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, David. Well, there's always some good and there's always some bad. And we can this is the bad segment. Tackling, there was a lot of missed tackles out there today.
Penalties.
Yeah. All right, during the game, for sure. Penalties. And that's, some of those things are to be expected.
Common of the first preseason game. Yes, for sure.
Sure. And a lot of lineups and things like that have probably never played together as well. I still think that we got to see a really good evaluation for a lot of players. And there was some players that we're having kind of quieted camps that came in and struggled early on for the Chargers, including JT Woods, who I think you have to start with him because he's the 3rd-round pick. We know in a perfect world, right, he develops to the point where he's the 3rd safety on the field behind Nazir Adderley and Derwin James. And he also brings some things to the back end, like the takeaway ability and the raw speed, which I actually think did show in that first preseason game to the table. Outside of that, though, David, I mean, it was a pretty rough start for a guy as far as, hey, I'm trying to show this team that I'm ready to get on the field early on in the season.
Yeah, I mean, the play that you were talking about what happened with the touchdown here, it's one of those things that's, hey, you got to have more control there, JT Woods. You got to understand what's going on. You can't be reckless.
It was a wild play.
Yeah, you gotta go for the ball carrier also, and you're the receiver, not your own guy, and you take him out of the play, and then that's the end of it. But also, I want to talk about a positive there with JT Woods too. Although the interception that he got was taken back because of a pass interference, he would have got that interception anyway. If that pass interference did not happen, he was still in the right place. You saw the soft hands. You saw that ability to at least catch the ball, because we have seen a couple of safeties, Nas Adderley, that had a ball that literally went right through their hands. So it is nice to see that. But yes, the biggest issue for JT Woods is still the biggest issue. And of course, that is the tackling.
Yeah. And that's, what the preseason for him, first and foremost, was about. It's being in the right spot and be able to tackle once you get there. I thought, as far as being in the right spot, I think he made some strides in this game. I didn't think he was super out of position. He did find himself in a great position for that interception. He would have had it even without the defensive pass interference from Brandon Sebastian. And it was a bad throw too. I mean, it's not like he had to do anything crazy for it, but he was in the right place at the right time. Showed the ball skills and the awareness to go up and get it, and play through the play even after you see a flag, things like that. And you see why they were tempted to take him, right? Because he got in position. He didn't show a lot as far as the running game and, laying big hits on running backs or anything. But he has 2 more games to really show this team, right? And a joint practice session with the Cowboys this week to really show this team that he can get on the field early. I mean, the tools are obviously there. The tools showed up in preseason game number 1.
Yeah.
It's the trust level that he's going to have to build with this coaching staff, that he can make the big tackles when he has to, that he's not going to tackle his own player. Of course, he's not going to tackle his own player, away from tackling a receiver before a 60-yard touchdown. That was like, there's always a certain level of weird in the preseason for sure. And that was perfectly embodied on that play, because, I mean, Dean Leonard, even after he had gotten beat, was still in a good position to make the tackle and kind of still fighting for the ball a little bit. And then he just got yanked off by JT Woods. But it wasn't somebody I felt more bad about than Dean Leonard, because that man got some real hype early on in practice, right, at training camp, and had some really, really good plays against better people than he was playing in this game, right? I mean, he's been covering much better receivers than the guys that were headed out there for the Rams, right? And has made plays on them. You wouldn't know it if you'd only watched the first preseason game, because this was the laundry list, David, for Dean Leonard. It was a long list that included getting beat on a 60-yard touchdown, a pass interference in the end zone that gives the team the ball on the 1-yard line, and then also hitting the punt returner before the ball arrived on a punt return as the gunner actually got down the field in good time. I mean, a second later, we're all probably freaking out about that hit. He just got there a second too early and then ended up giving up another touchdown as well. I mean, it's hard to imagine a worse start for Dean Leonard. I'm not totally writing this kid off yet by any means, but a lot of teachable moments there, to say the least.
If you just took all of those things that you just mentioned at face value, you'd go, oh man, you need to cut this guy right away. But then you actually put the tape on and you watch him. He was in position a lot. He was right there. He was in phase, as Brandon Staley likes to put it. He was glued to the receivers. Just one major problem that plagued Michael Davis in the beginning of his career. He could not turn his head around to locate the football. If you do not turn your head around to locate the football, you are going to get called for pass interference every single time. You just can't do that. And hey, that is what is great, is that it's happening right now here in preseason game 1. They're going to get this tape and they're going to show it to him and they're going to coach him up because, hey, you love the fact that he was there. He was in positions a lot of the times, but that one thing, that turning the head around, that can be coached. We have seen Michael Davis make strides doing that. He needs to go back to doing that. But for Dean Leonard, this is great teaching tape for him. He's going to get better, and this is where he needs to make his mistakes so they can improve upon them.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to find dudes who can cover well in general, right? And as far as coverage goes, he was right there, and that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, he was in position to make a play on every one of the worst plays that he had during this game. He was there, and he could have made a giant play. And we could be talking about, oh my God, how is this dude not going to take the team or make the team as a 7th-round pick because of how well he did? But that's not a small thing to be able to just be in those positions. Like, think about how many times last year where it was just dudes running wide open with 5 yards of separation, right? That's not what was happening.
Yeah, with Chris Harris having his hands in the air going, I don't know what's going on.
Totally. I mean, there was sticky coverage all over the field. I mean, even the, Asante Samuel Jr. pass interference, like he was right there step for step with the receiver. A lot of those situations, I mean, where the Chargers just didn't execute in the final phase, in the deep part of the field when the ball was in the air. That comes with time. This is a dude who's super inexperienced, was literally playing college football in Canada only a couple of years ago, and has 1 year of borderline starting experience in the SEC, which is great experience to have. This dude was going to be a project all along. The fact that you've even seen some real flashes of the dude playing well at times is, I think, a really great sign for his development. I'm not going to say he's not going to make the team or make the team today. Obviously, he has a long way to go before the Chargers would be able to trust him to put him on the field. But we were talking about tools with JT Woods. I see the tools with Dean Leonard. I see why they're intrigued with this guy. I'm not going to write it off or overreact after one preseason performance. I think there's a lot of really, really good things there to work with.
Yeah, I agree, Daniel. And that's the thing is hey, we see all of these performances, but we also have to keep in mind the quality of competition that they're going up against and their experience level. And, Dean Leonard's a rookie. This is his first game in the NFL, and it's in preseason action. So you want to make all these mistakes right now so they can correct them, coach them up, and get them ready for the regular season. So, it's going to happen. It's expected that these rookies are going to have some room to grow.
Yeah, and you have to give them that. And that's what the nice thing is about the Chargers this year specifically, is there's less of a need to get a lot of these young guys on the field right away. You don't need your 6th and 7th round rookies to come in and contribute for you right away. Maybe have a role on special teams. And I think both did good and bad things in that. Jasir Taylor and Tito Aboni are the only guys. Oh, and Xander Horvath, he deserved to be in the what went right section, I guess, of this preseason recap. But as far as the other guys, it just wasn't really enough to put them in either category for Tito Abonia and for Jasir Taylor. Jasir Taylor missed a tackle on the goal line where he had it lined up, kind of got slid off by Emeka Egbule a little bit. and also had a really nice special teams tackle too. So I think some positive things there. For Tito, I thought he held his ground better than he did in college in this first game. I mean, it wasn't, shedding guys and making big plays in the backfield or anything like that, but he didn't look super out of place either. He wasn't getting driven back like 5 yards or anything that would make you think like, like this dude isn't ready for what he's going
he
up
maintained
against.
his ground, and I mean, that was positive to see.
Yeah, and it wasn't a given by any means with the Chargers defensive line of last year. That's a very deep group. And I mean, when you're talking about all of these things, right? All of these things have roster consequences. All of these things either bring your stock up or your stock down for where you stand on this team and what your role is going to be on the team. So even though we talked about the biggest stories from the preseason game today, tomorrow we will be getting into camp updates, right? Some guys who did raise their stock, some guys who lost some of it, right? I would put Jerry Tillery probably in that category. I mean, Braden Fehoko, I think, might have even made some separation with some of those defensive tackles at the end of the roster. And what's happening with the right tackle situation? What's happening in the wide receiver room with a lot of expectations? There's a lot more to get to from this preseason game that we're going to get to tomorrow. But to make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and also follow the show for free on all platforms wherever you get your podcast from. You can find me on Twitter for all of my latest updates and to find the show every day at Dan Talk Sports. And the same thing for David Droegemeier at DroTalkSD, and his DMs are always open. We always post the show on our show's Twitter page as well at Locked On LAC. Made it to 4,000 followers. Thank you guys for that. That was really awesome to see, and we appreciate you guys and appreciate all of your support always. But you can also find the show on all of our social media, like at Locked On Chargers on Instagram and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. If you guys want to get your reactions into the first preseason game, you can do that at the Locked On Chargers voicemail line at 323-524-7924. Tim, we always trying to get every Chargers voicemail played on the show, and we'll try to get some fan stuff going throughout the week as we kind of settle in to how these preseason recaps and things like that are going to go. But after next week, we'll probably do a live show after, even if it's at like 11 p.m. and get it out a little bit quicker to you guys. But tomorrow we will be back with how everything else shook out as far as the Chargers depth chart and their position battles. But make sure you guys are here for that. Until then, take it easy and go Bolts.